Good evening and welcome to the September 25th, 2019 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Ms. Schmidt, will you please call the roll?
Chairperson Bowman.
Here.
Vice Chair Boyle.
Here.
Member Cahill.
Here.
Member Down. Member Sullivan.
Here.
Member Watson.
Here.
Member Williams.
Here.
Member Wolf.
Here.
Member Sell and Member Downs are absent.
Thank you. That does give us a quorum, though. Moves us on to item B, approval of the agenda. There's an agenda in the packet that was delivered to each of you. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Vice Chair Boyle. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call. Is there discussion on the motion?
Only slightly. I guess we'll bring it up when it comes up, though. But I'm confused what's going on with our first public hearing.
Well, that's that. You weren't the only one. Ms. Schmidt and I had an email dialogue today, sort of compounded my confusion. So, or reinforced.
I guess
my
I was
confusion.
wondering whether it should be stricken or we just deal with it as it
will
comes
not
up.
be. That's a fair question. So, so I guess that's the discussion on that. Well, that it should not be stricken, but we'll deal with that in a few minutes. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed. That motion carries. You also, in your packets, had a copy of the minutes of the September 11th, 2019 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed. That motion carries as well. That brings us on to committee reports, starting with the Form-Based Code Committee. The committee met on September 18th. That was 1 week ago today. And as you know, we met in work session that same evening at 5:30 and moving the, we were moving through the, an untouched part of the code up to that point. It had to do with uses, specific uses that are actually sort of connected, not sort of, that are actually connected to that form-based code. And then, as you know, we did touch on some larger issues at the work session that evening. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for October 11th at 11 o'clock. And then, of course, we have two more work sessions on October 16th and on October 30th. I'll invite my two fellow committee members to add anything else if they feel the need. Any questions for the committee? We're continuing on. I see that the Hannah Community Center Study Committee had a meeting this past Monday, yeah, the 23rd.
Yes, we met on Monday. We have completed most of the work on the draft of the report to council from the committee of recommendations. Will be put in final form and tweaked and circulated, and then I anticipate that, I don't know if it goes to planning first or just to council, but it will be forwarded on to whichever the proper party is.
Terrific. Any questions for Vice Chair Boyle? All right, thank you for that report. That moves us on to item 3, staff reports. Ms. Schmidt?
And there are none at this time.
All right. And then on to item 4, commissioner announcements. I'm seeing none of those either. That'll move us on to communications from citizens. We'll begin with oral communications. Now is the time in the meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and make a comment on any item that is or is not on our current agenda. Please note that there is a public hearing currently scheduled regarding the property at 115 Albert Street. And so if you're going to make a comment on that, we'd ask that you hold your comments until that time. I would also remind the public that we're looking at a site plan and special use permit for several properties along Bogue Street, and that there are some updates that are included in that particular presentation. So in keeping with what has become current policy or current practice, we'll also invite people to come up and make comments on those, given that they're going to be offering some updates tonight. It won't be part of a specific public hearing, but again, we'll just welcome public input if there is any on that particular item. So once again, I'll reiterate, this would be the time in the meeting where if you have comments to make on any item on our agenda or not on our agenda, please come forward now. I'm seeing no one come forward. I will make a note that we did receive one item of written communication from the DeWitt Township, a rezoning public notice from DeWitt Township for some properties on the west side of Chandler Road, south of State Road, and they've invited us to make a comment on that rezoning announcement, that rezoning application. And that moves us through communications from citizens and on to our business items. The first being item 6A, a public hearing. This is a site plan and special use permit. A public hearing will be held to consider a site plan and special use permit application from the Peabody Group for the property at 115 Albert Avenue to allow the establishment of a restaurant, including alcohol sales. Ms. Schmidt.
Yes, this application will be postponed to a date certain to October 23rd at a time when the applicant can re-notice a public hearing. The applicant has modified their application enough that it will warrant a new public hearing, so we will be seeing the application, but it will be on October 23rd opposed to tonight.
Do we need a motion then to pick up this piece? Given that there's a new public hearing and it's going to be renoticed, it might not be necessary, but I think the reason that specifically you didn't want it withdrawn is so that we could actually act on it tonight and expect to work on it roughly a month from now.
Correct.
All right. Commissioner
Would
Cahill?
that be a motion to table, or?
To postpone to a day certain?
Postpone.
Yep.
Okay. I would move to postpone to October 23rd. Was that the date?
Do you want to ask for public comment first?
I don't know that why we
Decide not to.
couldn't. The intention, of course, is that we're going to do that again in about a month, but I don't know that that would be entirely out of line.
If someone showed up for the public hearing,
Certainly. The notice, the public notice information that went out specifically indicated that there would be a withdrawal, but may I postpone your motion for a moment? The correct way to do that exactly, and I'll just ask if there's anybody from the public that wishes to make a comment on the as yet to be seen site plan and special use permit at 115 Albert. I'll invite you to come forward now with full knowledge that you'll have another opportunity in about a month. I'm seeing no one come forward, so we'll close that public hearing and bring it back to the commission, and I'll suggest that there is an active motion on the table from Commissioner Cahill to postpone to a date certain.
I'm not sure I finished the
Thank you.
motion. My motion would be to postpone the public hearing on this agenda item to October 23rd.
Sure. Thank you.
second.
Thank you. So there's a motion and a second to postpone this item until October 23rd. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, that motion carries. Moving us on to item 7A in our old business. This is a site plan and special use permit. A public hearing will be held to consider a site plan and special use permit application from Core Campus Manager LLC for the properties at 131, 135, 207, 217, and 227 Bogue to demolish all of the existing buildings on the site and construct a 14-story, 720-unit multifamily development in two separate buildings, each at 152 feet tall, including amenities for the residents and structured parking for 400 vehicles. The development proposes a mix of apartment types ranging from efficiencies to 4-bed units, including row houses. Ms. Schmidt.
This application was discussed 2 weeks ago at the meeting. At that time, the applicant had requested several additional items to be provided. Those items are listed at the back of your staff report. Underneath each of the items that are listed are the status of those items tonight, and I believe the applicant is going to provide a presentation on those items that aren't shown that they've been provided, and then also on the things that have been provided. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Don't have a question so much as a clarification. I sent an email to the group of you today suggesting that the traffic study had not yet been received. Indeed, has been received. It just has not passed through the Transportation Commission yet, and
That's
so
correct.
not ready for review by the Planning Commission.
Correct. It will not be ready yet.
My error. Any questions for Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, in the two tables on page 2 and page 3, that are breaking down the distribution of apartments by bedroom and number of occupants and so forth for the two buildings. When I compare those numbers to the numbers at the bottom of page 1, I don't get the same results.
That has been updated. I've been able to get a chart to compare. Originally, we didn't get a chart from the applicant that showed their numbers and where their numbers came from. We've since been able to get a chart from them and been able to find where our discrepancies were. So now the tables are close, and where they don't match up, we know exactly why they don't match up, and I can explain that. So now the tables match up, and the numbers in the last sheet will match up for the parking numbers.
When you say now, you mean in a copy of the document that we don't have yet?
Correct. That you will have on the next iteration.
Okay.
Future staff report.
Correct.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Correct.
Other questions? Anyone else, other questions? Any other questions from the commission? All right, then I'll invite the applicant to, I see that they're here. If you'd like to come forward and proceed. Mr. Pearson, thank you.
Sorry if I could. And when we hear back on the unit chart, we'll respond to that? Because that's the architect's specialty. That's not
That's
mine,
fine.
so I'm not going to, and he said he hadn't heard back yet.
Oh, I see. So we'll not ask Mr. Pearson any questions about...
Mr. Zalesko will have to answer any questions you have about the unit mix and the numbers. If I could start with a procedural question, which is, we would like to ask you to postpone consideration of this matter from your meeting on October 9th to your meeting on October 23rd. It's simply a matter of who's where. And we can't get everybody who needs to be here to answer your questions on the 9th. And so we'd ask your consideration in pushing that to the 23rd. We also hope that we can get the questions that you have tonight so that we can get you answers in time for you to consider them, look at them, and we would hope be able to vote on the matter at the 23rd, if that's possible. I'll leave
I
that.
can't imagine that there's it's in some ways driven by your desire or not to move it forward in the most expedient manner. And so if you'd rather not present on the 9th, I think that's just a matter of letting staff know.
Okay. We'd rather not.
Noted. Thank you.
Generally, postponements are not unwelcome.
No, exactly. Well, if it's an official,
And I know that you have other things that will occupy your time.
Thank you.
On the 9th. And I should say, the Transportation Commission should have the report of your consultant who reviews, DLZ reviews the traffic report for the city. There's a supplement that was added because when the city had told the engineers what was needed for the traffic report, the city then communicated with MDOT, who added more intersections. So the traffic engineer had to go back, collect more data, and include those intersections. So there's a supplement that's been submitted, which we hope will be in time to get to the Transportation Commission on October 7th, which we had been hoping would then allow you to receive that on the 9th, but certainly would allow you to consider it by the time you get on the 23rd. With respect to questions that were asked at the last meeting, one was with respect to the engineers, your engineers, the city engineers' comments on the engineering plans that had been submitted. And it seemed to indicate that she didn't have the information that she needed in order to give a review of those plans. Our engineer went back and forth with, this is Nicole McPherson, the city engineer, and what we got back finally was, no, she doesn't expect additional plans for her review in order to be able to inform you. In basic terms, she says the conceptual layout seems to capture the items that were discussed between the project engineers and the city engineers. What she's expecting is that there is more detail that will be needed for final permit. She's not saying, I need another iteration in order to address these. As our engineer pointed out, most of the comments frankly relate to where the city's utilities are. As is mentioned in my letter, one of the issues in this area is Hub 1 could be built primarily using existing infrastructure. These buildings cannot. The existing infrastructure that's there is old, it's inadequate, and it has to be completely replaced. So part of it is figuring out if you're replacing everything that's around this site, how and where do you connect then to where you're picking up from and where you're leaving off. And so a lot of it has to do with surveying the existing city utilities, and as I'm sure you've run into on other projects, they're not always where they're supposed to be. So part of that is making sure that those can be identified, and then the final plans can be done after we get to the next level of detail. She's not expecting more. With respect to the designs, Jeff Zalesko is here and will give you more on additional views that the Planning Commission had requested, as well as shadows. One of the questions had to do with the shadows and the effect on, Nancy Marr was here. She owns the apartments immediately behind on Cedar. So the shadows give you the effect of that on her building, and then also cross. As the architect pointed out, most dramatically, the building that will have the most shadows, of course, is the hub, because it's north, immediately north of this building. What I also asked him to include, which is in what he'll go through, is an 8-story building. So since an 8-story building is permitted by right in the East Village District, what would it be so that you can have some sense of what it's doing that would have to require additional permission, in essence, to go more? What difference does that make? I also told them, since they're from Chicago, that the sun doesn't really shine here in December, so shadows are really not so much of an issue. In terms of the benefits of the project, and that was really kind of a question posed by Tim Rosowski, but I think very much was on the minds of the Planning Commission. I tried to do that on paper. I think one of the issues that we have is this is the next step, to just not to repeat everything I said in my letter because you already have it, but that keeping redevelopment going in this area we think is important. And one of the reasons we've asked for changes and for things beyond what was permitted previously is, as we've told you before, those are the things we think are needed to keep redevelopment going in East Village. That this is the place to do it, and that in essence, once we've turned the corner, it's time to keep going and set conditions so that that can keep happening. Rob Bach is here with information on comparing rents with other apartments in the area. They have rent surveys within a mile of the hub and can give you those to follow up, as well as the parking rates. And I think that also helps inform the discussion of what happens in the old Cedar Village and what a new Cedar Village means in terms of what's available and what the rents are. I think that's really all that I have. I would mention one thing in the infrastructure line is, apart from the underground utilities, two things that will happen as a matter of course are what's on Bogue Street is going to be better than what's there. For those of us who have walked on Bogue or tried to ride a bike in that area before the new bike lanes went in, this should be dramatically different. The other thing that's going to happen is because, as a matter of course, all of the utilities in the alley behind the building that are underground have to be redone. The alley that's behind will have to be redone. And if you haven't driven that alley, you should. It's exciting. It'll set aside a little time, but it gives you an idea of, I think, the reasons that Cedar Village needs some redevelopment. And that alone, I think, is an important consideration here. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have. If not, I'll ask Jeff Zalesko to go ahead and go through the new views that he has.
Questions for Mr. Pearson?
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, click the tab. So just go full screen. There it is. Sorry about that.
Been there. Yeah.
Good evening, Planning Commission members. My name is Jeff Salisco. I'm a senior principal with Antunovich Associates. I was planning on just going through the new sheets that we have. Those were based on feedback that you had given us in the previous meeting. So if you want us or would like me to look at some other things, I'd be happy to do that. But I'll just jump on to those if that's okay. So the first is going to be views from the rear of the building. So this first view is from Grand River and River Street. So in the foreground you see the hub and then the buildings along Bogue. The hub is in foreground by several hundred feet just because of its relationship along East Grand River. So you actually see that as a more prominent shot here, but we thought that this was a pretty important view as you're coming down along Grand River. And then we went just a little bit further back. Again, we wanted to place these within the context. So this is at Woodmere, just a little further away. Again, just gives you an idea of how these fit within the context of along Grand River. Then we moved more into the neighborhood. So we're at River and Victor Street back. So this is the other side of the block past that. And again, we thought that that was a reasonable vantage point because this is really where you can see it as you're driving along the streets. Gives you a good feel for what the buildings would feel like from those sides, from that side. So really, those were the three images we thought that really gave the best impression of what you see relative to the scale of the buildings from the behind. And then a couple of other things that we touched on was putting a car share drop off and pickup in both of the buildings. So the north building, this is the alley between the hub over here, and then this alley running east and west. So we have a drop-off pickup nestled into the building at that location. So drop-offs would come in, pick up. A person can walk right out to that location. And then it's a little bit different on building one, the south building. In that case, because our only access point, I think we all agreed that Bogue is really not the place to have the drop-offs and pickups. It would be mayhem. So we located that in the rear, and we were able to take some of the parking spaces we had off of the alley, and we were able to reconfigure the basement to pick up those spaces. So we don't lose any spaces. We just traded them from those outdoor spaces to the basement. Again, a person can then come off their elevators or be in the lobby, and they walk directly back, and then there's an access point for them to be able to view out. So we thought that those worked pretty well. We like that one is back here off that alley and one's off this alley, just so they're not both off the rear alley. They come off of different alleyways. So we thought that that worked out fairly reasonably. And then we also had fire command rooms in both of the lobbies, another comment that had come up. So really from a planning standpoint, those were the only things that we were looking at. And then David had mentioned about shadow studies, which we had provided. And so the shadow study that we have, so we do our shadow studies by summer solstice, the equinox, and then the winter solstice, and they do them from 10 a.m., 12 noon, and then 4 p.m. So shadows are obviously very small, low in the summer because of the height of the sun in the sky. In the fall and in the spring, they're a little bit longer than they are. And we're seeing, actually we're seeing shadows, by the way, for all the buildings surrounding us. So these three-story buildings on the university property, the other, various height buildings, four-story buildings to the south, and then our buildings. So the hub is casting the shadow, then our buildings. And then when we get to winter, when there is sun here, and I'm told it doesn't happen much, but I'm from Chicago, so it's not really that much different for us. But so the shadows, the shadow from the hub, our buildings casting shadows at 10 a.m. Shadows go directly north, obviously at noon, and then back across to the east at around 4 o'clock. So the shadow of the hub's casting across Grand River. Ours also do cast into the block. across Grand River in the evening, or 4 p.m. And then David had mentioned about, what would happen if it was an 8-story building. So the shadow from our building nudges in, so here's our buildings, they cross across 208 Cedar, which is, I think, the property we were talking about. So the shadow for an 8-story building extends out to Grand River also. When in the building, in our proposed building, it does go across Grand River at that time of the year. So, and then same thing, it actually, because of the angles and things, it's a little different. It gets out to Grand River at 10 a.m. So those are the shadow studies that we were proposing, really the only additional items, unless there were some other items you'd have some questions about, or other drawings or renderings you'd like to see.
Questions for Mr. Zalesko? Commissioner Cahill?
Do we have that shadow study in our?
It's not. We prepared that afterwards, so we'll make that part of it.
Okay.
And we can do, we'll do both of those. I mean, it's really a comparison. I think that was the use of it.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, excuse me, go ahead, Commissioner Cahill.
I'm concerned about the traffic and the traffic flow. Since our last meeting, I've tried to go every day or two, and I drive that alley. And fortunately, I haven't been hit yet, or the suspension of my car still seems to be intact. But I can't imagine you're proposing 400 parking spaces. And actually, the requirements right now would be over 1,200 based on the number of people going in there. I can't imagine how that kind of vehicle movement can be handled in this project.
I think you find, and the report supports this, is that the movements that take place in these buildings are far less than what you would expect them to be. So there's not cars barreling in and out, in at 8 a.m. or out at 8 a.m. and in at 5 p.m. They kind of really trickle into the streets. It's not the movement from a student-based building like this is far, far less than you think it is, and it's just because those cars sit there a lot. They really don't move that much. There's some information, I think Rob may want to talk about it, just about how many people in this building, how few actually get into their cars, for instance, to go to class. I believe it was like 10%. And that's based on, some figures, and Rob could talk about that more than I can, but I think that's what happens. If you're there, you don't see that many cars come out of the hub. You really don't, because they're not.
If I could, the two people to answer that probably are, Rob Bach has the survey data on the current hub, how the cars get used, and then also the traffic study does address the alley and the alley geometrics specifically. And it's hard to judge, I know, right now, because the city still has they're still doing the utility work. So this got worse because the city's water main had to be replaced all around there. That came after and is still going on. So that's part of the issue you're having in driving around there. But I think to start with, Rob can tell you how much comes in and out, and then the traffic engineers will be back and you'll have the report, which will give you a better idea how that works. Okay.
Any other questions for me before I step back?
Questions for Mr. Zalesko?
Thank you.
Sure, you stick close. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening. Rob Bach, I'm a development manager with Core Spaces, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. So to hit on that point first, so as our tenants at Hub 1 are starting to settle in, we've started taking some surveys, some statistics from the current tenants, and specifically on that one, Jeff hit it right in the head. I thought one of the most interesting ones was when asking, how do you get to class? And less than 10% out of 400 respondents that responded are using their cars to get to class. Over 65% of our residents are walking and biking to class. which what we wanted. You know, it is the most walkable location that we could ask for in East Lansing, and one of the things we're most excited about, and what our tenants are most excited about that location for, because they can walk to class. It's an amazing location. And on top of that, too, 20% are actually using public transportation as well to get to the other side of campus and other parts of East Lansing that they're moving around to. So to step back a little bit, I know one of the questions and part of the discussion that we were chatting about last time we were here speaking was kind of the overall health of the market. I know there were a few people that spoke and were kind of concerned about where the market is currently, and it just didn't seem like there were a lot of facts out there. So I just wanted to bring a few of the facts that we know, and one of the reports, third-party reports that we use, and it's kind of generally used throughout all sort of student housing centric real estate groups, is Axio University. And so looking at, we just pulled the report this week, and so the East Lansing market has averaged over 96.5% occupancy over the past 10 years. And with that, 98.1% over the past 3 years. And so that's indicative of a very healthy market, and it's why we want to continue to, to develop here in East Lansing, and why we're really excited about everything here in East Lansing. On top of that, the rent growth over the past 10 years has been over 3%. It's actually at 3.3%, which is another metric that we look very closely at, and we're very positive on. It's been a healthy rent growth as well. And kind of speaking about kind of more of the survey data that we've taken from students. So another recent survey where we surveyed over 250 students and asked about what are the 3 most important aspects that you're looking for when you look in a new apartment in East Lansing. Number 1, location. Number 2, affordability. And number 3, quality. And those are all 3 points that we can offer, and that we are really excited about bringing to the East Lansing market. We've brought it with Hub 1, and it's arguably the most, location-wise, one of the best locations, around the city for students to access the university, and all the great benefits of downtown because of that walkability, because of the easy access to all of the great retail, restaurants, and entertainment along the downtown corridor. And so it really, in our mind, it really makes sense to continue that in this location. We're most excited about this new site that we're looking at today. One of the other questions was kind of what are rents looking like here? They didn't have a lot of those facts last time for you guys, so I just want to kind of think about that relative to a lot of the other existing products around the Hub products, the existing building and our new proposed building. So we did a little analysis looking at, and again, a lot of this is taken from Axio, so another third-party report. But we looked at a 1-mile radius around our site, and then adjusted our rents relative to those to say that we pulled out, because we include utilities, cable, furniture in our rents, so we pull those out. So I wanted to just look at kind of current Hub 1 rents versus what the proposed Hub 2 rents could be, and compare those to the existing product around our group. And I broke out kind of existing product to kind of older product that's built pre-2010, and kind of more newer product which is built since 2010. So it's still 8, 9, 10 years old though. So, and so if I looked at 3-bedroom rents, which is our most popular unit, because it's typically the most affordable to tenants. And so if you look at, and I apologize I don't have it up on the screen, so I'll just sort of kind of speak through the numbers a little slowly so we can have them here. But if you looked at a 3-bedroom rent for Hub 1, currently adjusted for taking out those kind of amenities and things, it's right around $738 right now. With Hub 2, we're actually, as we've kind of always been saying about the opportunity to add additional height, and with the additional 4 bedrooms, lowering some of our rents because of that. We're actually able to reduce that down even further to $10 or $20 less per tenant. So if a 3-bedroom at Hub 1 was approximately $738, we'd be just under $730 at Hub 2. So it's pretty good reduction there. And then you would see that across all of the different unit types in our building. And if you compare that to the existing product within that 1 mile radius of the even the newer product that could still be 5 or 6 years old, that number is 763. So we're in a brand new building, arguably one of the best locations, high quality building with great amenities and all the security features that you'd be looking for, directly comparable to those rents and even slightly lower, which is something we're really excited about. And then with the addition of the potential for a 4-bedroom unit, we're able to bring that down even further. So that would be in a sub $700 range, which is really exciting for us, and I hope really exciting for a lot of the student population here at MSU, and in East Lansing. And if you look at kind of some of the even older product that was built pre-2010, we're almost in that range. We're seeing sort of 3 bedrooms in the high 500s, but it's still lower than what we'd be able to offer, but those are almost uncomparable products. So it's something that we're really excited about, and I think it's a great opportunity to continue to lower the price point in a high quality, well-managed building. And then it's kind of moving on to the parking rates. That was another question that came up in last meeting. So, and thinking about what our rates were, so when we originally started leasing, we were leasing our individual parking stalls at $80. And towards the end of our lease-up cycle, we ended at $100 per space. And that's for the full lease term of our tenants. And just kind of as a comparison to some of the public garages around and what permits might cost elsewhere, we were looking at the Charles Street garage, and the upper stalls are $100 and the lower ones are $125, so it's kind of right in line with market. The Grove Street garage is at $95 and Division Street is at $90. So it's, our rents are in line with publicly available permit parking. It's not like we are much higher than market, which I think might have been the assumption because we weren't 100% occupied in our parking. So it all kind of dovetails into our belief, our firm held belief, that we are adequately parking this space or this building for this location based off of what we're seeing at Hub 1 right now. And then finally, one of the other kind of comments or kind of discussion points that we're talking about was, what are some of the other cities that we developed in where we've added density and there's been a positive outcome? And so I just wanted to share a story about Columbia, South Carolina, where we developed. It was one of our first projects, and it was a little unique that we actually acquired a fully vacant office building, a 21-story office building in downtown. And we actually have a letter from the mayor of the city who has been raving about this project since 2014 when it delivered. And I'd be happy to kind of share that with you guys later if we could. But we added 900 beds to this very sort of dilapidated area that retail vacancy was incredibly high, and there was just kind of nothing going on there. It was pretty dilapidated. And by adding 900 beds to there, completely reinvigorated the downtown area and was part of their urban catalyst to reinvigorate their downtown into this walkable, lively urban center. And so it's sort of one of our big success stories that kind of density is good. It revitalizes the area, it consolidates resources, and it's been a great success for the city and for us as investors and developers there. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have and take it from there.
Questions for Mr. Bach? Commissioner Wolf?
You spoke about a report of I think you said 98.1% occupancy rate in East Lansing, a report from a marketing or a commercial firm, is that right? What was their name?
It's Axio, AXIO, yeah, it's one of the...
Can you explain that a little further? What is that trying to tell us? Is that counting every rental unit in the city as its divisor for the percentage? So all houses, all apartments, is it?
It's mainly focused on student-centric products, and so I can get some more details on their kind of their underlying metrics, but it's really to inform the sort of the student housing market as a sub-market of the overall housing market.
But you're not sure if it's counting, in that 98%, is it counting by individual apartment and house, or is it by bedroom? You know, some places rent bedrooms separately from each other.
I would imagine it's kind of, I would say it's by the bedroom for the most part. So but I can get some more details. I just can't speak to it intelligently.
And then my main question about it then is, what does it show as the total number of units? As the 100%, how many units do they show for the city of East Lansing?
I can get you that information, yeah. Next time when we come back
Okay,
in later,
and then the
later
final
October.
question is, are they counting only units that are within the city limits of East Lansing? Or are they counting the other apartments that serve MSU students but are not located within the city boundaries?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, I can't speak to it intelligently right now, but yeah,
All right.
let me come back to you on how those, all the metrics and
Thank you.
and boundaries that they include.
Okay, Vice Chair, please.
Yeah, I had some more questions about the Axios survey, too. I'd want to know what time period they actually conducted the survey. And was it done randomly? I mean, did they pick a percentage of representative properties and find out what their occupancy was? I'm assuming they didn't call every landlord in the city of East Lansing and ask if they had an apartment available, but
Yeah, I'll bring all that information on how they conduct their research.
because there's been quite a bit of housing added in the past few years to the city of East Lansing, so it might have impacted.
And I just want to, go ahead, Commissioner Cahill.
Did you see the letter from Prime Housing Group about the parking problems that they say they're having? I did. She's indicating that a third of their parking lot's being occupied by Hub residents, and they're having to have cars towed all the time.
Does she say Hub residents? I thought she merely implied that, and I wasn't sure how she knew they were Hub residents.
Well, I guess it says someone other than a resident.
Because I'm not, but I couldn't understand, I'll be honest, and I wanted to go back to that because I don't know why if I lived in the Hub, I would be trying to park in the neighbor's parking lot where I'm going to get towed if I'm trying to have a car there 24/7. And so I don't know the source of that.
Yeah, and I would have questions whether
Right.
there were really people in the Hub or not, and I
They
suppose you can track that down where the people are coming from that are getting the tickets, I suppose, but I'm wondering about, she says they're getting calls all the time from Hub residents looking for parking. I'm wondering what the Hub parking situation is right now. Are you full?
As of the last time we were here, we were at 95% parked. So we are not 100% full at this time.
Our assumption is that people are shopping around trying to get cheaper.
Okay.
So let me put it this way. I'd asked her if somebody if it's that close, it seems to me it's a natural thing if I'm going to pay $100 to them to say, can I be across the alley for less? And she has no available space, as she mentions. So.
Okay.
And I know that Darcy had mentioned last time that people were looking in the Charles and Division garages, suggesting that, they could probably raise their rates a little and do okay.
Okay. When we spoke at the last meeting, you brought up a development in Arizona, I think was it Tucson?
Tucson,
Yeah,
and we were trying to get more information to get the whole, because we mentioned that it was a larger area, and we don't have that finished yet, but we'll get that to
Okay,
you
so something will be
before the
coming.
next meeting, because we
okay.
talked about redevelopment. What happens if you have more than one of these?
Right.
what happens
Well, I was
then.
concerned about
Right.
similar density and how
Right.
the traffic works and everything,
Right.
so.
Yeah, I was, unfortunately, I was hoping I would be able to find kind of an updated, comprehensive kind of report or anything like that that could speak to a lot of it. But, you know, since the rezoning, it got rezoned in 2012, there hasn't been any kind of follow-up study on it that can be definitive. It'd be more kind of just anecdotal, you know, from our side. But at least we can, you know, at least bring back some of that more information.
Even pictures of the area.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
can see how things move and
one
along with some statistics about how dense it is.
Sure.
In that area.
And one thing that's probably worth mentioning, as long as we're talking about vacancies, there are two buildings we do know about, Landmark and Hub, which are, what are you, 90?
We're 94, 95%.
And I
Landmarks
understand
very
Landmark's
similar.
the same, and that's about 1,000, that's just around 1,000 units that have come online this fall. So I think one of the concerns, particularly because of the bumps there were with the one down by Frandor, the Skyview, there were concerns whether that would translate into downtown. But it certainly hasn't with those two buildings.
Right.
That seems to be the case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Watson.
So, for rent, sometimes it's got to be 3 times the person's income. Is that around the case for you guys?
Well, so since most of our tenants do not have any income, we you know, can't offer, we don't have that requirement. And so we have a co-signer usually for most of our tenants. But if someone can produce, you know, an income, so if it's call it someone who's working or a non-student or whatever it might be, we have other regulations like that that we would look for.
Okay, so I know your price breakdown took out like utilities and cable.
Mhm.
It's like if a person gets stuck though, they're not paying that $730 or $740 that you quoted. They're signing a lease to pay more money, and they're going to owe that that amount of money, right?
That's
Yep.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
My other question is, you talked about the 3 bedrooms, but it seems like that's the least number of units. Do you have information on like 1 bedrooms, the price breakdown in comparison for the mile
Sure.
radius?
Yeah, so you know, the one-bedroom units typically are our most expensive units. And so if you looked at, we actually don't have any one-bedroom units in Hub 1, actually. But our studio there would be, it's 1,075. And that's actually less than what we're showing an existing product of 1,161. And then, you know, we'd have a slight decrease for Hub 2 from that number.
That's the 1161 is everything else in the city that's been built since 2010.
That is a studio apartment.
Yeah.
Correct.
The 1 bedrooms are 1265 in the newer, and as Rob says, Hub 1 doesn't have a 1 bedroom, but just to give you an idea of what those rents are, because I didn't know. 2 bedrooms are 853, and they're 887 at the Hub. And I guess the other one that I wanted to mention that Rob didn't, the young man who lived in the fraternity mentioned $650
that sounds
as the
right.
rent he was paying for a 2-bedroom. And the 2 bedrooms at Hub 1 are more than that by a couple $100. But if we can get to the 4 bedrooms, they would come down close to that. Now, a 2-bedroom versus a 4-bedroom, but it's also a 4-bedroom in a newer place. At least there's more choice there, I think, is what we're angling for.
Commissioner Williams.
You mentioned 175 for studio, backing out utilities, furniture, I think you said.
Correct,
What's
yeah.
the
for lack of a better term, fully loaded figure for that unit?
I don't have it right here in front of me, but it would be probably likely $100, $200 more than that. I don't know exactly.
100 or 200, did you say?
Yes.
Which is far enough apart, we should get you the full number.
Yes, sorry.
I
will.
It might be 200. That's, to me at least, that's worth knowing, so
Yeah.
we'll tell you what the discount was.
Yeah.
And your presumption on the 738 price that you gave us, that presumes the 14 stories and what's it, 720 units, and the availability of 4-bedroom units that are sort of going to soften the mix up a bit.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
Correct,
Thanks.
yeah.
Commissioner Cahill.
I'm not sure this is where I should be directing the question. Maybe someone else is coming up that's more, better to address it. I have a question about the construction period
Okay.
and how that will be handled.
Mhm.
Is someone else coming up, or is that?
No, we're it.
But do you keep in mind that we're going to see this again on the 23rd, or certainly, this is not, we're not making any decisions tonight, but if there's a sort of, if you want to direct some
Yeah,
questions.
It'd be great to get the
Well, I want to
question.
let you know
and
that's
then-
something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
and How it's going to work and the effect it'll have on the properties that already exist. Obviously, there have been complaints about the effect the construction of Hub 1 had on neighboring properties.
It's an 18-month construction period, given the size of the building and the type of construction. So that is what we have to deal with. We also have to acknowledge the fact that the utilities in the alley have to be completely rebuilt. So that's going to take some real planning, because if you've been over there, and if you look at it, an aerial photo gives you a real clear idea. The parking is off of the alley for everybody along it. And so we'll need to address, how do you get there when there's no alley there? And what's the timing? Or can you do the utility work and the alley work during the summer at least, since it's all student housing, so as to minimize that? That's the sort of staging which we'll need to address. We can talk to the architects and see how much detail we can give you for the next meeting, at least to get you an idea as to how that might work through, in order to try and keep that down.
Right, and that's part of my concern. I was thinking about, okay, we tear up this alley, all these parking spaces then are inaccessible.
Right.
I'm wondering how this would all work.
Yes, and it's very present to mind with Albert closing for that utility and road work, just when we're getting back the other part of Albert.
On the other hand, I realize improvements have to be made at some point anyway, so.
Okay, other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, so just to clarify, redoing that alleyway is part of this project? Are there any changes that are going to be made to it? Is it any new entrances, anything like that?
It's going to be 2 feet wider on our side, and then we're hoping someday it'll be 2 feet wider on the other side, because it's currently undersized. But at least it will be completely rebuilt and repaved. We're standing there, so this gets hung on this project. First in gets to do that. So that will happen.
Okay, and then are all of the units going to be furnished, even the townhome style units?
We're still evaluating that, but for the most part, in Hub 1, they are all fully furnished. In some of our other properties, we have looked at potentially, if people do not want furniture, that we offer, we don't furnish them and could offer a rental type option if someone wanted that. So it's something we can still evaluate. If there's anything that, is that kind of coming from anything that you were thinking of?
I'm just curious
or
if it
is
was going to be an upgrade, an option,
Okay.
if there was going to be any flexibility there. Perhaps not everybody will want it furnished, and that could be an effort to reduce some of the cost to some particular units, for example, the townhome style units.
Okay. Something we can look at for sure.
Commissioner Cahill, just a second. Commissioner Wolf?
Also on the alley, just to clarify that question, so this project would be reconstructing the entire length of the alley, right? Not just the portion behind these buildings, but
That's
Also
what-
behind-
That's what your engineer says. As their attorney, I don't know that I want to say, yep, we're going to redo the whole alley without suggesting maybe there's a way to spread that cost a little bit, but.
All right.
Yep, that's what we're supposed to do, because the utilities have to be redone. There's no way around that. They're undersized. They've got to go in. They're under the alley.
All right. The alley is currently functioning as a two-way alley. Is that correct? That's what I recall.
Functioning might be overstating it.
Well, the vehicles are driving in both directions, and it's not labeled as one way, right?
No, it's not labeled as one way, but my suspicion is the traffic study will have something to say about that. They might suggest that it be one way.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we want to work through with city engineering as we're evaluating the traffic study and evaluating the potential for the building. So we're open to working through all those details, obviously.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Cahill.
Chris kind of touched on what I was wondering about, because obviously you're saying you'll expand the alley 2 feet, but obviously there's a property in the middle that's not yours. So,
I don't know the answer to that yet.
okay.
Yeah. Our hope would be that people who might get a new alley and have it fixed would be cooperative, but you never know.
That might be affecting their parking. As I drove by today, there were cars actually parking sideways behind the other cars that were parking straight in.
Right.
I don't know if that's a normal occurrence there, or if that's illegal, or
It's
what, but
It's
that reduced
happens
even.
it's pretty frequent that you get tandem parking, to put a nice name to it. Yeah.
Okay.
And that they're out into the alley. That's the other thing that makes it, that's why when you're saying two-way traffic, yes, if you can get through depending on where people are parked.
Right.
Yeah.
And if there's two cars coming in opposing directions, it's not a matter of one way, it's no way.
Right. There's some chicken that goes on there.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
If I may ask, if there are other questions that occur to you, if you could get Darcy to send those to us rather than save them up, we'd love to try and answer them ahead
Appreciate
of time,
that.
because I know when you're mulling it over later, those may come to you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
As I mentioned at the top of the meeting, I'd like to invite any members of the public that have questions or comments on this proposal application to come forward now. This is not a specific public hearing, just another opportunity to make comment on the new material, or maybe a new opportunity to make comment on the old material. I'm not seeing anybody come forward, and so we will see this again, presumably at our meeting on the 23rd or thereabouts. Moves us on to item 7B. This is ordinance 1468. A public hearing will be held to consider ordinance 1468, an ordinance to amend the use district map of the city of East Lansing by rezoning the properties at 710, 722, and 722.5 Grove Street from R2 Medium Density Single Family Residential District to RM 32 City Center Multiple Family Residential District. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you.
Certainly.
This application was brought to you 2 weeks ago for a public hearing. At that time, the Planning Commission did not have any additional questions. This application, at that time, you also made a recommendation to City Council on the Class B multiple family house site plan that was in front of you, and sent that forward to City Council. This would follow that application to City Council once you've made a determination or made a recommendation to City Council. The staff planner that wrote the report did put a motion for your convenience on the very last page, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have left that maybe didn't get considered at the last meeting.
Questions for Ms. Schmidt? I would note that the applicant is here as well, if there are any questions for them. All right, thank you. Commissioner Wolf?
I will move that we recommend to City Council approval of Ordinance 1468, a request from GTW Investment Properties LLC to rezone the properties at 710, 722, and 722.5 Grove Street from R2 medium-density single-family residential to RM32 City Center multiple-family residential.
There's a motion on the floor.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan to recommend the rezoning to City Council. Is there any discussion on that motion to recommend rezoning to City Council? Commissioner Wolf.
Sure. I think this, as was discussed at the last meeting, this proposed development should fit well into the area. A rezoning is necessary in order to put it here. It cannot be built under the current zoning. The one slight hesitation there could be about this is that the zoning that we are considering is not consistent with that recommended in the master plan, but considering that the development itself is consistent with the neighborhood, I don't think that really causes us a problem. And we don't have a zoning currently that would match exactly what is recommended in the master plan. So I'll be voting in favor of it.
Other discussion on the motion? I'll add that the applicant at the end of the presentation 2 weeks ago had indicated that they've got in as much as we're not asking for, they weren't providing or weren't offering a conditional rezoning, that they did indicate that they had a long-term lease with this particular tenant and that the use is not likely to change anytime soon. Though,
Right.
you know,
25-year lease. I think you said.
exactly. Any other discussion? All those in favor of recommending the rezoning to City Council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, that motion carries. That moves us on to item 7C, Ordinance 1469. A public hearing will be held to consider Ordinance 1469, an ordinance to allow for and regulate adult use marijuana establishments. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you. This was held a public hearing 2 weeks ago at your last meeting. This would be an ordinance that if you didn't act on this, it would automatically be approved. And then not the ordinance, but the law would be automatically approved, and it wouldn't be regulated. So staff or the city attorney has put this ordinance together to provide boundaries for the city council and planning commission to review that would allow recreational marijuana only where a medical marijuana facility has been approved and is in operation. Under those circumstances, there are several other opportunities to have different businesses under the regulations that were put out, but the city attorney did not opt to put any of those options in the ordinance. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Ms. Schmidt? Vice Chair Moe?
I'm just wondering what the rationale was for limiting a medical marijuana retail to only those sites that have already been approved for medical marijuana. I mean, we still have some land, don't we, that would be enough separation in an overlay district where an additional marijuana retailer might locate?
That's a good question. I don't know for sure. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that it had to be associated with a medical marijuana facility anyway.
I guess I don't understand that.
The state doesn't require that, do they?
No. I think the city attorney felt that since we already had medical marijuana in place, that those that had medical marijuana were going to want to have the recreational marijuana as well, and to have the same regulations in place for both the recreational and the medical facilities, that it would be kind of an easier opportunity that way, opposed to having.
I guess I sort of anticipate that the people who have medical marijuana SUPs are going to get retail marijuana SUPs, because it's going to be easier to run a non-medical marijuana dispensary, you call it that. But I guess my question, I'm a little disturbed if the only people who can apply for retail marijuana sales are people who have already been approved for medical marijuana. It just, it sort of disturbs me that it's like giving people an advantage, and then kind of an exclusive advantage. If we're gonna opt into recreational marijuana, I can understand the overlay, I can understand the separation, distance separation, I can understand all those things, but I don't understand why we would limit recreational marijuana only to those individuals who already have medical marijuana.
Commissioner Williams?
I wondered about that as well, and this is maybe a question for the city attorney, but I wondered if it was tied to the fact that those who have medical marijuana licenses will be the first to get recreational licenses. And perhaps it was just a, we'll start here and maybe move forward later, but I wondered about that as well.
It's a good question.
Commissioner
Yeah, I have exactly the same reaction when reading it, the same reservation about the way it's stated. But I guess I have two comments. One is that I don't think it prohibits any new person from coming in for a recreational marijuana business. If they can find the property, as Commissioner Boyle mentioned, we might still have some properties that qualify. They could still come in with a request for a medical marijuana special use permit, and then when they get that, immediately then apply for the retail marijuana one. So it's not excluding anybody, it is making a kind of an obstacle course of permissions, trying to force them to get two when they really only want the retail marijuana license. Second comment, to me, it reads as though it's intended to be a temporary measure, and I hope it's a temporary measure. I hope we're not intending to keep it permanently that way. The city, well, all municipalities in the state are kind of under pressure to do something here, because if they don't do anything by, I forget the deadline, November, December sometime, then it gets decided for them. And we do want to regulate it, and we do want to allow it, so we have to have something in place. And it does seem as though this is the easiest way to put something in place that we think we're comfortable with, and don't have to spend a lot of time developing a whole new system for. So I can kind of accept that, but it would be nice to hear from the city attorney that perhaps that is what's intended, that eventually we could move on to a system that is more designed for the retail marijuana and don't base it on the medical marijuana.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, I think you're on point there. I think maybe that's the expectation, is to put in some baseline standards for the city to have in place, and then at a later date go in and broaden those or revise those as the city sees necessary, because we really are right up against this deadline, and I think that's the goal, reading between the lines.
Good point. Vice Chair?
Well, one of the reasons I raised the question is I have been reading some information about licensing and the fact that they thought it wasn't open enough to more diverse business owners and people of differing income levels. And if that is a concern, and I think maybe it should be for the city of East Lansing, if you would require someone who doesn't already have a medical marijuana license to get 2 licenses in order to open a retail, which you'd have to do if you have to get the medical one first,
Sure.
then I think that's greatly restricts somebody who's of lesser means, but might be a perfectly good business operator from going into this business. And I just, maybe the city attorney had a reason for doing it this way, but without knowing that reason, it's really, this is kind of a stumbling block for me. I'd strike the whole paragraph if it were up to me.
Excuse me, Commissioner Sullivan.
Yeah, just briefly. That's a conversation that they're having at the state level as well. That was brought up in committee. There are barriers, particularly to people with less income starting establishments. So, and I know that the legislature continues to have that discussion. So maybe that is part of the reason why.
Commissioner Cahill.
Do we know what the extra cost would be to have both a medical and a retail?
We can find that out for you.
Any other questions for Ms. Schmidt? It doesn't look like you're looking for action on this evening?
No.
Yeah,
no.
okay. So that these questions can still be addressed?
Yes.
I mean, I think, I don't think any of us thinks that anybody that pursued the medical license didn't have, at least in the back of their mind, if not the front of their mind, that the switch was going to get thrown at some point and that they were going to be able to make use of that as at least a foundation for a recreational business. And Commissioner
I'll
Wolf?
just comment further that I'm in agreement with Commissioner Boyle. It's hard to see what we would really lose by striking that requirement, because we would still be applying virtually all of the same standards to the business, the safeguards that we have, that they will be a good business that will complement the community, and we could eliminate the need for them to apply for 2 licenses. So
And I don't know that there was any particular rationale behind it. There was maybe, and I think like the staff report states, it was kind of a starting point to start the conversation. So we'll talk to Mr. Yaden and make sure there wasn't anything in particular that he was putting that in there for.
good.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cahill?
I'm thinking probably that's put in there because the determination made by council was that they wanted to limit the amount of marijuana establishments to 3. So they probably will still want to keep it at 3, right?
But it doesn't limit the number. Someone new could come in, apply for medical marijuana at a location, and then apply for retail marijuana there. Could be an entirely new business.
Like the property we saw
But
2 weeks ago?
you can only have 3 medical marijuana places in East Lansing now, right?
No, we have no limit on numbers. We do have a limit on distance and where the overlay allows them. But we didn't expect to see the one up, the new one up on West Road.
There's 4 zones,
Right.
Okay.
and one of those zones already has potential to, the one over near Costco, or
On Merritt
potentially
Road.
has 2. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And again, if the property that we saw last 2 weeks ago gets subdivided and easements and so on, remember there were some questions about that, there's a potential additional one there. So you're right, there's effectively a limit in that there were a number of zones and
Okay,
then
that's why
distances
we
from
were
zones. There
winnowing
you go.
down
That's right.
previously,
Exactly.
okay.
We have 5.
I understand now.
We have 5 approved already and a 6th in the works.
Okay.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt or comments? All right, I'm just looking at Mr. Yaden's memo, and it says he's recommending taking action so that our regulations can be in place by November 1st, which is still more than a month out, given that council's going to have to see it as well. It sounds like we could see it one more time if...
Yes, one more
All right,
time.
that sounds fine. So any other questions, with the expectation that some of the concerns we raised tonight will be covered the next time we see this? All right, then.
Okay.
Yep, that'll move us on to new business, of which we have none, and then on to item 9, commissioner concerns. Commissioner Boyle, or Vice Chair Boyle?
I don't know if this is a concern, but I'm just wondering if staff or someone on staff is familiar with the survey company that was referenced regarding the Bogue Street project, Axios, and what their methodology is, and my guess is that their study is, are you going to make money off of this building, not is this building needed for the city? But anyway, I would be interested to know a little bit about them, and I know we asked them for some information about how they did their study, but if you have any as well, that would
See
be,
what we can find out.
that would be, help me weigh it, certainly. I hear about the 90 what's-its%, but I see an awful lot of buildings that are clearly renting now. It's not that they're renting for next school year. They're clearly are for rent now, so.
In fact, the Element building directly across from the hub has a big sign that says now leasing
Yeah,
for their apartments right across the
yeah,
street.
so I just, the more information I have, the easier it is for me to weigh things. I still would hope that the city will go ahead and do a comprehensive survey about whether we're saturated or not, near saturation. I know that the Red Cedar project apparently is going forward. That is an awful lot of housing. Certainly it's much, much farther than the hub is, but I'm not sure where all these bodies are gonna come from that they're gonna rent to, but over 1,100, isn't it? I can't remember how many.
I haven't seen.
It's a
I just
lot.
know that they're going to be working on it day and night.
Yes, well,
Or maybe,
mostly day and night, I think. I think,
up to a point, yeah.
yes, we had some people from my neighborhood who were at the city council meeting, because apparently someone at the meeting thought that all of the neighbors of the Red Cedar project were transient. Now, I don't know what difference it makes if you're a student studying for exams, or if you're somebody living in my neighborhood with little children who want to go to sleep. But apparently
Big
they
children
thought
want to
that
go to
that was
sleep.
worth mentioning, and they completely overlooked the fact that there's a neighborhood right across Kalamazoo from where they want to do construction 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But that's not in our city, so
That's right.
we have no control over it.
Other concerns? Commissioner Cahill?
I had one just from my driving through that alley behind where the Hub 2 is proposed. And I guess I was wondering, is that area part of what's being considered for new parking regulations?
For,
Like, you know, where council is going to prohibit parking on certain streets?
that's
For
a
the
good
street
question.
lights.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Is it?
I don't know if that is, yeah. It's a good
I
question.
don't either.
Yeah,
The reason-
I don't remember it coming up in the discussions. It's interesting you mentioned that, but I don't remember that ever showing up on the maps or.
The reason I'm asking is, as I've been driving around, number one, first of all, that turn into, I'm not sure what the name of the first street is, east of Bogue,
That's-
between River and.
That's Cedar Street,
Cedar.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very difficult turn in from Grand River. I was kind of thinking we should have, I don't know if we can do that, made them shave off some of that corner so the turning radius wouldn't be so drastic. But secondly, when I'm trying to get into that alley, it seems like there's always a car parked on my right that makes it very difficult to even see what's coming out of the alley. And then it's a very narrow, it seems quite hazardous to me.
You're talking about
Is-
the alley behind the current hub? Or-
No,
or
the-
when you
no,
go
the
all
one
way
that would
to the
be
south and come
The north-south alley.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the cars are parked illegally. I hadn't really looked at whether there's a no parking sign there or something, but it seems like every time I go, there's a difficult turn and just to even get in there because there's a car parked there. So I was wondering if that was part of where council was considering
Check that.
banning parking.
And on Cedar Street, or?
Yes.
Thank you. I did have one additional concern I'd mentioned in my email to the group, the group today, that I was actually somewhat pleased to hear Mr. Pearson's intention to sort of self-delay the next time we're likely to see the Hub 2 project, but I think we need to be mindful of the fact that the underlying zoning that's associated with that particular parcel or those parcels won't actually, our recommendations are gone to council, but council won't see that until the 29th of October. And if they choose to ask us to reconsider, or if they don't, or if they accept some of our recommendations or none of them, that could have a significant impact on what that project, what the project is ultimately going to look like. I guess I'll leave it to you and then perhaps follow Mr. Pearson's recommendation or request that if we feel strongly enough that it's our feeling collectively that ought to be put off until I'll say the discrepancies with the zoning are resolved. I think that that's well within our authority to do that. I know that that's been an issue that's particularly been vexing for you, Commissioner Cahill, and certainly all of us perhaps to a degree, that, in the past we've looked at these and said, if indeed the zoning changes do take place, then we're comfortable with recommending. But I think my personal feeling is that in this case, we're talking about some significant changes to the current zoning, and that it might be best to hear what council has to say about those potential modifications before we act. I'll leave that to the group, knowing that we're going to meet as a commission before the 23rd, before the time that Mr. Pearson expects to represent this to us. But perhaps at that time, it wouldn't be a bad idea to discuss that and give some direction perhaps to council and to Mr. Pearson and his group, to the applicant, as to what our thoughts are regarding reviewing that before the underlying zoning is in alignment with the proposal. And that's all. Yes, Commissioner Cahill.
Along those lines, last week I unexpectedly had something come up that I couldn't come to the work session.
Oh.
Were there materials passed out that were being reviewed, or?
Yes, and I'll get those to you. And we also have the audio on Granicus if you'd
Oh,
like to
great.
listen to it.
Oh,
So-
good.
And there were a couple of things we had talked about that were going to be part of a follow-up. I
Yes.
can't remember, like the example form-based code
Yes, yes,
designs. Yeah.
yes.
There were a couple of things that sort of additional materials.
That I'll get to everyone.
Okay. I don't usually use Granicus. Like, I usually go to the website and get the agenda and everything and click
Sure.
on that. Will I be able to find the video?
Yep, you should just be able to go to the video and it'll be audio instead of
It's audio.
video.
That actually is Granicus, if you look at the
Okay.
web address you're on.
Mhm.
Okay.
You're not using the Granicus app, but you are using Granicus there.
Okay.
Yep, that's it, Granicus. Yep.
And it would be listed on our previous meeting?
Yep, it'll say work session.
Okay, great.
All right, any other concerns? Then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved?
It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Vice Chair Boyle. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:34.
Darcy, I noticed that